The bitter Montana winter wind sliced through the cracks of Eleanor Kincaid's cabin like invisible knives, each gust making the timbers creak in protest. Eleanor Ellie, to those who knew her before life had worn her down, cradled her 6-month-old daughter Katie closer to her chest, the infant's soft breathing the only comfort in a world gone cold. The stove, an ancient cast-iron beast that had faithfully served the previous occupants of this isolated homestead, had finally surrendered to years of hard use, its fire dying hours ago despite Ellie's desperate attempts to coax it back to life. The year was 1879, and the promise of a new beginning in Sloan, Montana had turned bitter as the December frost. Ellie pulled the threadbare quilt tighter around Katie's tiny body, her own fingers numb with cold. This was not how she had envisioned their life when she'd left Chicago after Henry's death, her husband's tuberculosis having claimed him just weeks after Katie's birth. The modest inheritance and her determination to forge a new path had led her west. But now, on this frigid night, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. A sudden pounding at the door startled Ellie from her thoughts. No visitors came to this remote cabin 3 miles outside of town, especially not in the dead of night during a bitter cold snap. She hesitated, her heart hammering in her chest. The knocking came again, more insistent. "Hello? Anybody home? Saw your chimney wasn't smoking." A deep voice called out, muffled by the thick wooden door. Ellie placed Katie gently on the bed, tucking the blankets around her, and grabbed the shotgun Henry had insisted she learn to use. With trembling hands, she approached the door. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "Zachary Irving, madam. I was riding by and noticed your place looked mighty dark for such a cold night." Ellie hesitated, the gun steady in her hands. "I don't know any Zachary Irving. Just moved to the area myself, madam. I'm working at the Rocking M Ranch about 5 miles west. Was heading back from town when I noticed. Thought I'd check if everything was all right." The sincerity in his voice and the bitter cold compelled Ellie to make a decision. She unbolted the door, keeping the shotgun visible as she opened it a crack. The man standing on her porch was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden beneath a snow-dusted hat, but she could see clear blue eyes that held no malice. Snow clung to his heavy sheepskin coat, and behind him, a magnificent chestnut horse stood patiently. "Your stove gone out?" he asked, gesturing to the dark cabin behind her. Ellie nodded, her pride warring with practicality. "It died earlier today. I can't get it started again." The man Zachary nodded thoughtfully. "May I?" he asked, gesturing inside. After a moment's hesitation, Ellie stepped back, allowing him entry but keeping the shotgun at her side. Zachary stepped into the cabin, removing his hat to reveal wavy brown hair that fell just past his ears. His gaze immediately went to the cold stove, then to the small bundle on the bed. "Your little one's sleeping through this cold?" he asked, his voice softening. "She's always been a good sleeper," Ellie replied, watching him cautiously. Zachary crouched by the stove, examining it with practiced hands. "Dampers rusted shut and the flue's likely blocked," he said after a few minutes. "No wonder it won't draw proper." He glanced at Ellie and then at the sleeping baby. "Madam, you'll have heat before sunrise. I promise you that." The certainty in his voice made Ellie's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. It had been so long since anyone had offered her help without expecting something in return. "I don't have much to pay you with," she admitted. Zachary shook his head. "Not looking for payment. No one should be cold on a night like this, especially not a little one." He stood up, towering in the small cabin. "I need to fetch some tools from my saddlebag and gather a few things for the fire. That all right with you, madam?" Ellie nodded, lowering the shotgun fully. "My name is Eleanor Kincaid. Most people call me Ellie." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Ellie," he said with a small smile that transformed his weathered face. though I wish it were under better circumstances. As Zachary went to his horse, Ellie checked on Katie, who continued to sleep peacefully despite the cold. The baby's cheeks were rosy, her breath visible in the frigid air of the cabin. Spent 3 winters in Wyoming territory with nothing but a stove between me and freezing to death, he replied, not looking up from his work. You learn quick what keeps you alive out here. For the next hour, Zachary worked on the stove, cleaning out the flue, fixing the damper, and making adjustments to improve the draw. Ellie helped where she could, handing him tools and holding a lantern to provide better light. They worked mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable one, broken occasionally by Zachary's quiet instructions or explanations of what he was doing. Finally, he sat back on his heels. That should do it. Let's get a fire started and see if she draws properly now. Ellie handed him the kindling she'd prepared, and he arranged it skillfully in the stove, adding the pine pitch and a few larger pieces of wood from her dwindling supply. When he struck a match and touched it to the kindling, the flame caught immediately, a small orange glow that quickly grew stronger. There she goes, Zachary said with satisfaction as the fire began to crackle and heat radiated from the old stove. That'll see you through a spell, at least. Mr. Irving, I can't accept. Zach, he interrupted gently. And yes, you can. Neighbors help neighbors out here. It's how we all survive. He glanced at Katie, still sleeping soundly. Besides, can't have that little one getting cold again. As the cabin gradually warmed, Ellie prepared coffee, grateful to finally have use of the stove again. Zachary accepted the steaming mug with thanks, and they sat at her small table, the fire's glow casting dancing shadows on the walls. What brings you out here all alone, if you don't mind my asking? Not foolish, brave, Zachary corrected. This land tests everyone who comes to it, man or woman. He looked around the cabin, taking in the evidence of Ellie's efforts to create a home, the carefully mended curtains, the small shelf of books, the cradle handcrafted with obvious care. You've done well, considering. His simple acknowledgement of her struggles brought unexpected tears to Ellie's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, unwilling to appear weak. And you? She asked, redirecting the conversation. What brought you to Sloan? A shadow crossed Zachary's face. I should tend to her. Zachary stood immediately. I should get going anyway. Have to be up at dawn for my duties. He put on his coat and hat, then paused by the door. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon with that wood, and I'll bring some supplies to properly fix that damper so it won't stick again. Thank you, Mr. Zach. Ellie corrected herself. I don't know how to repay your kindness. Zach shook his head. No need for repayment. Just glad I was passing by when I was. After he left, Ellie nursed Katie in the now warm cabin, gazing at the cheerful fire in the stove. Ellie stepped outside, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the cold. This is too much, Zach. You must have spent hours cutting all this. He shrugged, continuing his work. Boss gave me the morning off when I explained the situation. Said it was the Christian thing to do. Ellie watched him work, noticing the easy strength in his movements and the care with which he stacked the wood to keep it dry. There was something comforting about his presence, solid and dependable in a way she hadn't experienced since Henry fell ill. At least let me feed you lunch, she insisted. She ladled stew into bowls and placed them on the table. I had hoped to be better prepared before winter set in, but everything takes longer than expected when you're on your own. They ate together, and Ellie found herself sharing more about her journey west, the difficulties of securing the cabin, and her plans to plant a garden come spring. Zach listened attentively, offering occasional advice based on his years in the territory. You should consider getting some chickens, he suggested. Easy to keep, and they'll give you eggs year-round if you treat them right. He checked the chimney, secured a loose shutter, and even fixed the front door that had been sticking since she moved in. "You're quite handy," Ellie observed as he gathered his tools. Zach smiled, a touch of pride in his expression. "Had to be. My pa was a carpenter before he took to ranching. Taught me early that a man who can't fix things has no business owning them." As he prepared to leave, Ellie impulsively reached for his hand. "Would you," she began, then hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. "Would you consider coming for Sunday dinner? As a proper thank you for all your help." Ellie learned that Zach had been born in Pennsylvania, the son of a skilled carpenter who had moved west in search of better opportunities. He'd lost both parents to influenza when he was 17 and had been making his own way ever since, working ranches across the Western Territories. "Never stayed in one place too long," he admitted. "Always seemed like there was something more to see over the next ridge." "And now," Ellie asked, "will Sloan be just another stop?" Zach considered her question, his gaze thoughtful. "Not sure yet. Depends on what reasons I might find to stay." "I'd like that," Ellie replied honestly. "Katie would too, I think. She seems fond of you." As if on cue, Katie cooed from her cradle, and they both laughed. "Smart girl," Zach said with a grin. "Takes after her mama." That night, after Katie was asleep, Ellie sat by the fire, thinking about the day. Guilt mingled with her happiness. Was it disloyal to Henry's memory to enjoy another man's company so soon? Yet she couldn't deny the lightness she felt in Zach's presence, as though some of the burdens she'd been carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. The following weeks established a pattern. Zach would visit on Sundays, often bringing small gifts, fresh game he'd hunted, tools he thought might be useful, once even a book of children's stories he'd found in town. During the week, he'd sometimes stop by briefly on his way to or from Sloan, just to check that Ellie and Katie were doing well. January gave way to February, and the bitter cold showed no signs of relenting. One Sunday, a blizzard hit unexpectedly, the wind howling around the cabin with such ferocity that Ellie feared the roof might tear away. Katie, fascinated by the storm, refused to sleep, so they took turns walking her around the cabin, telling stories and singing softly. "You have a nice voice," Ellie commented as Zach finished a lullaby, Katie finally drowsy in his arms. "My mother used to sing that one," he said quietly, a hint of sadness in his voice. "She had the real nice voice. Mine's just passable." "Katie disagrees," Ellie smiled, nodding at her daughter who had finally fallen asleep against Zach's broad chest. The blizzard raged outside, but inside the cabin, something fragile and new had been acknowledged between them. They stayed up late talking, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, the things they feared. When Ellie finally went to bed, leaving Zach on his makeshift bed by the stove, she felt a curious mixture of peace and anticipation, as though her life had turned a corner. The storm passed by morning, leaving a pristine white landscape and clear blue skies. Zach reluctantly prepared to return to the ranch, knowing he'd already be late for his duties. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of possibility. Ellie found herself smiling more, singing to Katie as they went about their daily routines. Even the endless winter chores seemed less daunting with the knowledge that Zach would return soon. When Wednesday came with no sign of him, Ellie told herself not to worry. The ranch work was demanding, and the snow made travel difficult. By Friday, however, concern had settled like a stone in her stomach. It wasn't like Zach to break his word without sending word. Saturday morning, Ellie bundled Katie securely against the cold and made the 3-mile journey into Sloan. The small town was bustling despite the winter weather, with ranchers and farmers coming in for supplies and socialization. Ellie made her way to the general store, where the proprietor, Mr. Hollis, greeted her warmly. "Mrs. Kincaid, good to see you. How's that little one doing in this cold?" "She's resilient," Ellie replied, adjusting Katie in her arms. Mr. Hollis, I was wondering if you'd heard anything about trouble at the Rockingham Ranch? I'm concerned about a friend who works there. Mr. Hollis's expression grew serious. You mean young Irving? Heard he took a bad fall from a horse couple days back. Doc Peterson was called out there. Ellie's heart stuttered. Is he? How badly was he hurt? Don't rightly know the details, madam. But he's still out at the ranch, so I reckon it wasn't bad enough to bring him to town. After purchasing the few supplies she needed, Ellie made an impulsive decision. She hired a wagon and driver to take her to the Rockingham, ignoring the raised eyebrows of those who saw her departure. Zach's in the bunkhouse. Took a nasty kick to the ribs when a horse spooked. Nothing broken, but he's laid up for a few days. Relief flooded through Ellie. May I see him? I won't stay long. Mrs. Morgan hesitated, then nodded. Not usual to have women in the bunkhouse, but the other hands are out working. I'll take you. The bunkhouse was simple but clean, with 2 rows of narrow beds. Only one was occupied, by a figure Ellie immediately recognized despite the bandages wrapped around his torso. Zach! She exclaimed, hurrying to his bedside. It's nothing serious, just a young stallion who took exception to being saddled. I'll be back on my feet in a day or 2. You should have seen your face when I walked in, Ellie teased gently. You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Just surprised to see my 2 favorite ladies, Zach replied, his hand moving to cover hers. Though I can't say I mind the visit. They talked for nearly an hour, Zach insisting he would be fully recovered soon, Ellie updating him on the minor events of her week. When Katie began to fuss, signaling her hunger, Ellie reluctantly prepared to leave. Afterward, instead of helping with chores as he typically insisted on doing, he sat in Ellie's rocking chair, entertaining Katie with stories while Ellie cleaned up. The domesticity of the scene struck Ellie forcefully. This was what she wanted, not just help with the practical aspects of survival, but partnership, companionship, someone to share both the burdens and joys of raising Katie. Later, as Zach prepared to leave earlier than usual due to his still healing injury, Ellie made a decision. Zach, she said, standing close to him at the door. What you said during the blizzard about being patient, about waiting until I was ready. She took a deep breath. I think I might be getting there. Ready, that is. Zach's eyes searched hers. Hope and caution mingled in his gaze. You sure about that? I meant what I said, there's no rush. I'm not rushing, Ellie assured him. Henry will always be part of me, part of Katie, but my heart has room for new love too. I think it's what he would want for us. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Zach leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deeper as Ellie responded, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders. When they parted, Zach rested his forehead against hers. Been wanting to do that since that first night, when you opened your door with a shotgun in your hands, he confessed with a small laugh. Ellie smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in months. I'm glad you didn't try it then. I might have shot you. Worth the risk? Zach murmured, kissing her once more before reluctantly stepping back. I really do have to go. Boss is already giving me special treatment because of the injury. Sunday? Ellie asked, already looking forward to their next meeting. Sunday, Zach confirmed. And maybe Tuesday evening too, if I can get away. As February turned to March, and March began to hint at spring, Zach's visits became more frequent. He often came straight from work, staying for dinner and leaving only when it grew truly late. The Morgans pay fair wages, and I don't have much to spend it on. Been thinking I might look for a small place of my own come summer. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. Your own ranch. Nothing grand, Zach clarified. Just a modest spread. Something I could build on over time. He hesitated, then added softly, "Something that could support a family." The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. As April arrived, bringing with it the first real thaw, Zach suggested a picnic to celebrate the changing season. He arrived on horseback, leading a gentle mare he'd borrowed from the ranch for Ellie to ride. "I've never ridden astride," Ellie admitted nervously as she eyed the mare. Zach's eyes twinkled. "First time for everything. I'll teach you." Katie, now nearly 10 months old and increasingly active, was secured in a special sling Zach had fashioned that allowed Ellie to carry her safely while riding. With patient instruction, Ellie mastered the basics of horsemanship, and they set off toward a meadow Zach knew of that would be showing the first wildflowers of spring. But in the ways that matter, in trust, in caring, in wanting the best for each other, I think we've learned what we need to know. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I'm asking if you'd do me the honor of becoming my wife." Tears sprang to Ellie's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, hardly believing this moment had arrived. "Yes, Zach, I'll marry you." The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Zach gathered her close, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of his deep love and respect. Katie chose that moment to crawl back to them, pulling herself up on Zach's knee and babbling happily. Zach scooped her up with his free arm, including her in their embrace. "Looks like she approves," he said with a grin. "She's loved you from the start," Ellie replied, her heart so full it seemed it might overflow, just like her mother. The ride back to the cabin was filled with plans and dreams. Zach had found a small property for sale not far from Ellie's cabin closer to town, with better land for farming and raising cattle. "It needs work," he cautioned, "but the bones are good. And there's a creek running through it, sweet water year-round." "When can I see it?" Ellie asked eagerly. "Tomorrow, if you'd like." Owner's eager to sell before he heads to California. They decided to marry in June, giving them time to prepare the new home and for Ellie to make a proper wedding dress. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Sloan, and to Ellie's surprise, the community embraced the news warmly. Mrs. Morgan insisted on hosting the wedding at the ranch, offering her sizable parlor and garden for the celebration. Ellie divided her time between wedding preparations, caring for Katie, and packing up their belongings from the cabin that had sheltered them through the winter. On the morning of their wedding day, a perfect June Saturday with clear skies and gentle breezes, Ellie stood in a guest room at the Morgan Ranch, wearing the dress she had labored over for weeks. Made from cream-colored silk Mrs. Morgan had ordered specially from Denver. It was simpler than the fashion plates but elegant in its simplicity. Mrs. Morgan herself helped arrange Ellie's hair, weaving in small white flowers from the garden. "You look beautiful, my dear," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "Zach is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Ellie replied, thinking of how far they had come from that cold December night. Katie, dressed in a miniature version of Ellie's gown, toddled around the room, more steady on her feet with each passing day. She had recently begun attempting words, and Za had become her name for Zach, much to his delight. A knock at the door revealed Mr. Morgan, who had agreed to walk Ellie down the aisle in the absence of her own father. "It's time, Mrs. Kincaid," he said kindly. "Your groom is waiting, and if his pacing wears a hole in our parlor floor, my wife will have his hide." Ellie laughed, gathering Katie into her arms. Together with Mr. Morgan, they made their way downstairs to where guests had gathered in the Morgans' spacious parlor, which had been transformed with flowers and ribbons for the occasion. At the far end stood Zach, more handsome than Ellie had ever seen him in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed but still long enough to curl at his collar. Beside him stood the minister from Sloan's small church, Bible in hand. As Ellie walked toward him, Katie perched on her hip, Ellie saw Zach's eyes fill with tears that matched her own. This was a moment neither had expected to find a second chance at love, at family, at building a future together. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not only to love and honor each other, but to create a home filled with warmth and acceptance, to remember always the blessing of having found each other. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed Ellie tenderly, then pressed a kiss to Katie's forehead as well. "My family," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The celebration that followed was joyous, with music provided by local musicians, abundant food, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Katie, overwhelmed by the excitement, fell asleep in Mrs. Morgan's arms and was put to bed in an upstairs room. As dusk fell, Zach and Ellie slipped away from the festivities, retrieving Katie and making their way to their new home for the first time as a family. The small but sturdy farmhouse welcomed them, freshly painted and furnished with a combination of items from Ellie's cabin and new pieces Zach had either made or purchased for their fresh start. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irving," Zach said softly as he carried Katie, still sleeping, across the threshold. "It's perfect," Ellie replied, taking in the cozy main room with its large stone fireplace, the kitchen with its new cook stove, and the 3 bedrooms, one for them, one for Katie, and one for the future, as Zach had said with a meaningful smile when showing her the plans. After tucking Katie into her new bed, they stood together in the doorway of their bedroom, the reality of their new life together suddenly profound. "I never thought I'd find this again," Ellie admitted, leaning into Zach's embrace. "After Henry died, I thought that part of my life was over, that Katie and I would face the world alone. And I never thought I'd find it at all," Zach replied, his arms tightening around her. "Never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots, to consider what having a family might mean." He turned her gently to face him. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." Their first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges. The farm demanded constant work, fields to plow and plant, fences to maintain, livestock to tend. Zach continued working part-time at the Rocking M to ensure steady income while they established their own operation, often rising before dawn and returning home long after sunset. Ellie managed the household, caring for Katie, tending a large vegetable garden, preserving food for winter, and learning the intricacies of farm life. In late autumn, as they prepared for their second winter together, this one faced with a well-stocked cellar, plenty of firewood, and the security of their strong partnership, Ellie realized she was pregnant. She waited until evening, after Katie was asleep, to share the news with Zach. "We're going to have a baby," she told him as they sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders. Zach went still, then turned to her with such raw emotion in his face that tears sprang to Ellie's eyes. "A baby?" he repeated, his voice hushed with awe. "Our baby." His hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach, and Ellie covered it with her own. "Katie will have a brother or sister," she said, smiling through her tears. "And you'll be a father from the very beginning this time." Zach pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I already consider myself Katie's father in every way that matters," he murmured. "But yes, experiencing it all from the start. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. As the years passed, their family and farm grew together. A second son, James, joined them 3 years after Will's birth, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Sarah. Katie, now a confident young girl, embraced her role as the eldest with pride, helping with chores and caring for her younger siblings. The small farmhouse expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Zach adding rooms as needed, each addition built with the same care and attention to detail as the cradle he had made for Will. On a warm evening in their 10th year of marriage, Ellie stood on the porch watching Zach teach Will, and James to throw a lasso, while Katie helped Sarah collect eggs from the chicken coop. The farm stretched around them, fields of wheat and corn, pastures where cattle grazed, orchards beginning to bear fruit. All of it built from nothing but hard work and hope. Zach looked up, catching her eye across the yard, and smiled the same smile that had warmed her heart on a bitterly cold night so many years ago. He said something to the boys and then walked toward her, his stride still vigorous despite the decade of farm labor. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Irving," he said as he joined her on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," Ellie replied, leaning into his embrace. "From that night when Katie slept beside a cold stove and you promised we'd have heat before sunrise." Zach chuckled, the sound deep and warm. "Best promise I ever made, as it turned out." "You've kept all your promises," Ellie said softly, turning to face him. "Every single one." He kissed her then, a kiss as tender as their first but deepened by years of shared joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. When they parted, they remained close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. "Remember what you said that day?" Ellie asked. "That neighbors help neighbors. It's how we all survive?" Zach nodded, his blue eyes a bit more lined now but still bright with the same kindness and integrity gazing into hers. "Seems I was right about that." "You were," Ellie agreed, "but I think you left something out." "What's that?" "That sometimes, when you help a neighbor, you find your heart's true home." Zach smiled, gathering her close against his chest. "Wisest thing I ever did, riding by your cabin that night." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting golden light across their land, their children's laughter filled the evening air, the sound of a family, of a future built on the foundation of one simple act of kindness on a cold winter night. The stove that had brought them together still stood in their kitchen, faithfully providing warmth through each Montana winter. Ellie often thought of it as the heart of their home, a reminder that even in the coldest times, warmth could be found if you were brave enough to open the door to a stranger who might become your greatest love.